Congratulations, you got your application accepted and now you've moved on to the next stage, which is the interview. Now, keep in mind, they already like you. So go into that knowing that if they've already passed with your application, and I think about they accept around like 50% of applications or so, in the interview, they're not looking for reasons to disqualify you. They're looking for reasons to accept you and just make sure you're as good as you say you are on paper. Just know that when you're entering it on like a positive note, not like everyone's out to get you or anything. They hope, they want you to be a good candidate. That makes their lives so much more easier. No one likes rejecting people, right? Today I'll be sharing with you what it was like for my interview, what the experience was like, and then going over best ways, tips and tricks of how you can prepare, some advice, especially as someone who's already gone through the program. And I realized that now that I'm an alumni, all of those questions that they asked me back then makes more sense now. So hopefully I can give you the thought process of roughly what I think they're thinking. I can't say for certain. I never interviewed for the JET program in the past. I mean, I never interviewed people for the JET program. So let's do a little visualization exercise actually. Imagine you dress up in your suit, you walk and you head to the building, and in the location where they're gonna have the interviews, you step into the lobby, interview's already started. Just assume that with any interview you've ever done ever in your life, it's already started. Treat everyone nicely. You should already be treating people nicely in your day-to-day life anyway, but for some reason, maybe I shouldn't give you guys this advice so that the people who are actually not good people already get disqualified pretty early. Anyway, treat everyone nicely, and then once I reach like the right floor, a person who works at the consulate greets me and then guides me and walks me to a room with all the other candidates and a couple of the JET alumni. So along our way, he's chatting with me like, oh, how was traffic, blah, 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 blah. And then I'm responding like, oh yeah, it was really good, da 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 da. Just kind of giving, you know, I'm an outgoing person, right? Because they're looking for adaptable, outgoing people who are interested in Japan and who have some semblance of experience teaching whatsoever. So that's what I did. And then once I entered the room, let's say there was about 3 people who were JET alumni roughly. They were kind of going in and out of the room because they were assisting with walking the candidates from that waiting room to the room where you're going to be interviewed by a panel of people. And while you're waiting in that room, there's a bunch of other candidates. They're all nervous, but the JET alumni, they really try to do their best to, you know, help you relax before the interview. They're like, hey, do you have any questions about our time in JET? And you should have some questions, because I'm pretty sure they probably talk about you afterwards if this person had a good vibe or not. So I like to believe the interview already started. I just assume it, because you're literally talking to a bunch of people. I don't know about you, but in that short like 30 minutes, because the interview is like what, 15 to 20 minutes, and then you're waiting in the waiting room like maybe 10 minutes, so this whole ordeal takes about like 30 minutes. I remember usually when I walk into interviews, I just pretend I'm some other character. Even if actually I'm not that outgoing, and even if you're kind of introverted, just for that 30 minutes, just pass it through, make it seem like you're such an outgoing person. Push through those nerves to be shy and just talk to people. Just talk to people. And I remember in that room, I would like ask the JET alumni questions. Not even just them, but I would also include, of course, the other candidates making a conversation, right? Like, it's not about like me talking to them and ignoring everyone else. We're all people in a room. So we're just talking, having good chat, and then it's time to go in and we're like, cool, okay, thanks, bye. And we're like saying hi and bye to people who are coming in and out of the room. And then from there, one of the JET alumni walks me to the interview room. And then once you enter the interview room, I remember putting my little purse down on the seat next to me, and you're just like facing a panel of like, I remember 3 or 4 people. I remember there was like a professor, like a Japanese studies professor from one of the local colleges there. Someone else was, I don't know, it was 3 or 4 people. There was definitely a JET alumni there, so whoever experienced JET before, and then there was also someone working at the consulate, if I remember correctly. Roughly in that order. And they always start with the basic questions like, let's see. So you should prepare these for sure in advance. Things like why the JET program, you know, why do you want to teach English in Japan? And maybe they might ask, do you have any experience teaching? Or, you know, they might ask you, oh, tell us about yourself. And not just actually tell you about yourself, but you're always selling yourself in a way, and not in like a slimy way, just letting people know why you're a great person for the job, right? Like, own it, own your stuff. I know you've got experience in you. You've lived like 20 something at least years of your life. You can find something. And just spin it away. You're like, oh yeah, I'm into this, da da da, and then get to the point. The about yourself thing, just make it like about 3, 4, 5 sentences max. Don't continue rambling. And this is something you need to practice at home, out loud. Like, literally get it into muscle memory so that when someone says it, you just answer over and over and over, because on the day of, you might blank out. So it's great when your brain starts working on autopilot. You don't want to be there scrambling, but if you do, just calm and collect yourself. Something that I really enjoy doing in interviews to really make sure I still am in control of myself and the situation is you can literally just pause and be like, oh, sorry, I got a little bit ahead of myself. Let me go back to this point really quick. And then like you pause and then you say it. I think any person who's interviewing you would respect you a lot better than just you like scrambling and continue to scrambling the whole interview. Is just pausing, collecting yourself, and just communicating like, oh, I got a little bit ahead of myself. Let me backtrack really quick. And then you just continue where you left off. I think that's the best way. That's like my favorite phrase to use actually. And it's really great to use in the beginning because it reminds me that I'm in control for the most part of the situation. That's what I like most about in conversation when doing presentations and things. I think more important than getting it right is having a lot of this toolbox of ways you can correct yourself or compose yourself and catch yourself when you're like slipping up in communication. So that way you're not afraid of slipping up. You can easily catch yourself. So things like what I just said, or you can be like, you know, when people are asking you questions and instead of immediately jumping into an answer, you can say, wow, that's a really great question. I've never thought about that before. Let me think about it for a moment. And then you pause and then you speak, and people will really respect you more. Like, it's not about, I think in especially American culture, it's always like who's raising their hands first to get the correct answer. But in fact, I found interesting, you know, in different cultures and different worlds. For example, in Japan, they value people who are thoughtful, who like wait and then they answer. I don't know why, they just do that. But then it kind of becomes performative after a while. I mean, separate topic for another day. But it works, so just pause. It's not the end of the world. Everyone does it, it's very comfortable, it's very natural, and you can relax your body and then you can do a better job in your interview. But those are the main questions. So try to look at what the common questions are. I'm gonna try to put them somewhere either on the screen or in the description box below for you to take a look at that. Prepare for the common questions. Imagine it's 15 minutes. The first 5 minutes or 7 minutes are going to be common questions and you answering them. The second half are going to be situational questions, which means they're going to be different, customized to each person based off of their application, mainly based off of their application, really. They'll look through your application, they might see something interesting, and one of the panelists will ask you a question. Because the JET program is a grassroots cultural exchange, I remember they asked me a question about like, how would I talk about or introduce my hometown to the students in my students in Japan, to get them interested and share about my culture of my hometown. And I think I talked something about Hollywood because I was living in, you know, Los Angeles, so I was like, okay, but you can bring anything. Yeah, they're like, what can you bring from your hometown that you can talk about? Nowadays though, I think I might mention about Otani Shohei or something, who's, you know, part of the Dodgers, because I realize a lot of the students really love baseball and Otani Shohei, and he is like the star of Japan essentially abroad. And I remember somewhere along the interview, now this is kind of getting a little bit too advanced interview skills. I don't recommend it unless you've tried it out a couple times before in other scenarios, which is that I knew I could steer the conversation a little bit just because I used to work in sales before. So what I did in one of my answers was that I eventually revealed that I was curious about whether I could teach elementary school level, and that I went to volunteer at my local Japanese Saturday school to get a feel for that. And that piqued some of the panelists' interest, and they asked more about it. They were like, oh, what was it like when you taught those kids? And I said, oh yeah, they're like this and that. And then they're like, what did you do when the kids were acting out in class? They're not trying to like corner you. They're just giving you scenarios that have probably happened in Japan or that you can anticipate happening. And it's not about choosing the right answer, it's about communicating, being thoughtful, and how you would go through it in like an adult way. So I don't think you can really memorize these answers very well, but just think about it as you as a good person. If you can communicate what you would do in those scenarios, that's all they really want to know. that if you're a thoughtful person, and it's not so much about there's no right answer to this. So I communicated my thoughts. I said, well, when a kid did act out, this is actually what I did in that scenario, blah, 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 blah. And that impressed them. And I was like, okay, cool. And additionally, they might ask, luckily, because I talked about that experience, they didn't need to ask me one of those situational questions that I see some people getting from like the Jet Reddit forum, which is they tell you to teach a lesson, like how would you teach this lesson and have them pretend to be kids type of thing, or have the panelists pretend to be students and you're a teacher, teach them something. I didn't have to do that because I already explained my experience of teaching and what I did in difficult situations, and they were like, okay, cool. So they've already checked off my why. They've already checked off that I can sort of teach-ish. It doesn't have to be perfect. They just need to know if you can like do it and that you can adapt to curveballs. Again, not to corner you, but just to see if you can just, literally adapt and roll with it. My advice, if you've never done improv before, the number one rule of improv is that when someone gives you something, in your mind, you say yes and that's how you continue the story. For example, if in improv, if Susie says, hey, Brenda, like, you like apples, right? And then it's improv, so it's pretend. So I'll be like, yeah, and how did, like, I don't have to say yeah, and, but in my mind I'm like agreeing to it because I'm following along with her story that she's giving me. She's hopping the ball to me, and I'll say, yeah, how did you know that? Is it because, and I give like a fake story, like, is it because I ate like all those apples the other time we went out to the apple farm, and then blah, 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 blah. Versus if Susie was like to me, hey Brenda, you like apples, right? And I'll be like, no, actually I like oranges. And it just like kind of kills the flow, the conversation. So that is the trick ultimately to be adaptable, is to quickly accept the situation as it is and then think about, okay, and let's do this. Okay, and what do I do next, So if a kid is acting out, you can't just be like, stop, whatever. I mean, you can, but it's like, okay, this is what I'm working with. Let's see what my options are and what I can do about it. And that's what you can talk about in your interview too. You say, oh, I've never been in that situation before. This is helping you. Saying that phrase will help you, like, buy you some time to brainstorm your response if they give you a situation where like a kid is acting out or like some kind of teaching situation. You'd be like, oh, I've never been in that conversation before, but I imagine if I was, I would think about my options. I think I could do this, this, or this. I think I would go with this in the end. Just getting a glimpse into your thought process really helps a lot. So I would say that's also important tip for interviewing in general. I think so far we have a couple, which is one, really practice your key answers to common questions. I suggest getting the question, writing out your answer, and then like practicing it over and over out loud, saying it out loud until it almost becomes muscle memory, so that in the beginning, when you first enter and you blank out, you're already moving on autopilot for a little bit. Number two is to learn a couple of recovery phrases. It's when you're flustered in an interview, and then you can just take the moment to pause and breathe and calm down, which is things like I told you. Oh, sorry, I think I got a bit ahead of myself right there. Let me backtrack. You can adapt this phrase to whatever feels most natural to you. The third thing is learning filler phrases to help buy you time. So when someone asks you a question, you can say, that's a really great question. Let me think about that for a moment. Pause. Okay, this is how I would do it, blah, 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 blah. Or, oh, that's a great thing. I've never experienced that before, but if I did, here's how I would go about it, XYZ. Da-da-da. Number four is people cannot read your mind, and people value greatly if you can communicate your thoughts. You're literally just thinking out loud, you're problem solving. And I think showing that you can problem solve is already a sign that you know how to adapt, or that you have qualities of an adaptable person, instead of just like shutting down and be like, I don't know what to do when things hit the fan, and just going like there. So I think there's about 4 so far. So instead of memorizing very niche situational questions, instead just focus more on being able to communicate your thoughts of what you would do in situational what if scenarios. And honestly, personally for me, those interview questions of like what if scenarios are really fun, because it's like you're talking to your friends like, what if? Like, what if I was a worm? I mean, that's such a basic question, but it's like, what would you do? And like, why? But ask the why. So you say what and why. A lot of people will just reply with the what, but they won't say maybe like the how or the why. Like, why did you think that? Or how would you go about doing that? So people just say the what, like, I would do this. Okay, that doesn't give us a glimpse. For example, even what I did earlier, let's say a kid is acting out of class. How do you get them? Like, what would you do? And you're like, well, I would first try to figure out the context of why that kid is acting out. And sometimes even, I think this is also an advanced interview skill, but if you can get it, it's also really nice. People forget that an interview is can be a two-way conversation. And I did used to work in sales, so one of the skills we learn is kind of just taking control of the situation, or kind of working it in our favor. Not 100% control, obviously, but I would ask a question back sometimes. You know, if you don't know something, sometimes I want to buy time, they'll say something vague like, oh, a kid is acting out in class, and I'll say, oh, okay, could you give me a little bit more details on that, like how the kid is acting out, and like da-da-da-da. I'm like, oh, okay, so if I understand that context, then I think these are my options from what I understand is allowed in what I'm allowed to do. Of course, I want to, and then there's also something I want to add. As an ALT, you are an assistant to a JTE, a Japanese teacher, English teacher. So you want to know that, because sometimes actually disciplining kids is not your job. It's the teacher's job. So I would say like, oh, I would defer to the JTE on how best to discipline this child, because they might know something that I don't. You know, blah, 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 blah. It's a good way to handle it. Or I'd say, if it's a reoccurring issue, I would work with my JTE to talk about how we can best support this child. Because what you'll find later is that once you're working in the schools, a lot of problem children, or they're not problem children, but they act out a lot in class, is that they usually have difficult home environments, or they're just going through a lot, and it's not so much about telling them to like stop doing the thing. Sometimes we can help nurture them. I mean, this is more like child development in the elementary school years. You might not know that as an interviewee, because this is something I learned later as I was more into the job. But as you can see here, it's just the thought process. It's the deferring to the JTE, because you are just an assistant, you're not taking charge. And I think that's where a lot of people who have official teaching certifications might struggle with trying to get into the JET program. I have heard many stories of people who are actually teachers in the US, and they try to apply for this program, but they don't get in. They're like, why? I'm so certified. Because the thing is, they're not looking for teachers. There's already a JTE there that's the teacher. And it would cause a clash if you have another person who's a teacher in the US trying to, like, what do they call it? Like backseat driving, but it's like backseat teaching the main teacher, and there's like a clash of interests, because a lot of times you will have to defer to the Japanese teacher. So in that case, it actually works better if you're not too certified. Like disclaimer, I am by no means an official person who's hiring for the JET program at all. I don't know how they accept people. That being said, I do know when I was there was another JET who was actually a teacher in the US before, and they're really chill. Yeah, they're having like a chill time there. They don't interrupt with the JTE. So I think if you are someone who knows that you can trust and defer decision making to another person, that might be ideal for less friction, compared to if you are someone who is very gung-ho and adamant about your way of teaching. Because they're trying to look for someone who doesn't have too much conflict with the dynamic of ALT and JTE, because then you're more likely to stay longer, right? If there's a lot of friction and conflict, you're more likely to leave the program. And of course, they're looking for people who can stay longer than a year. They would prefer you stay longer than a year than have to keep rehiring people. Or worst case, if you quit before your contract, which we're not going to go over. But yeah, and then that should be it. I hope that really helps. I know it's a little bit vague, but I feel like there's already a lot of resources out there that tell you exactly the type of questions, exactly how to answer things. And I think that's very stressful. I don't think that's really helpful to people. I think giving you a framework and having you sit down and take some time to, you know, look over the questions, reflect, and think about and practice how you would respond is a better way to go about it, and just keeping that in mind. And then from there, so just continuing my story about the interview, I just did the interview, they asked me those questions. Sometimes the interview might go a little bit longer to 30 minutes if there is a Japanese assessment test, which I think is more for people who are applying for CIR, because you'll need to know the Japanese language. They're gonna see what your language skill level is. I wrote down in my application that I was like beginner, and they did ask me a couple of questions in Japanese, which I then told them, oh, because my listening was good, but my speaking was bad. I said, oh, my listening is good, but my speaking is bad, but I can reply to you in English. And they're like, okay. So they asked me something, and then I replied back in English, and they're like, okay. So they just want to check. They just want to check that what you wrote in the application was true. But yeah, I think that's about it. And I remembered that after the interview, but before I went off to Japan, I did also get a TOEFL certification, so teaching TEFL, a teaching English as a foreign language certification online. It's kind of just like a paper I wanted to have, so it helped me better prepare to teach in Japan, because I felt like, honestly, the JET training orientation wasn't enough. But I'm so glad I did that, because in my actual job, I ended up having to do some lesson planning, and from me learning from the TEFL certification, I was able to make a lesson plan and prepare that and teach children with that framework, which I wouldn't have known how to do if I didn't take that certification. So I recommend, as a plus, maybe try to get that certification before you apply for the JET program. But if not, I still recommend that you get it even after getting accepted with the JET application, because it was quite useful for me. Even if I didn't get a lot of in-person practice experience, that one you're just gonna learn on the job, like trial by fire. And that's about it. Good luck. I hope that you get the placement of your dreams. If not, that's okay. I've known many people who have made the best of their inaka, countryside, rural experience. Honestly, the experience is what you make of it. And lastly, if you'd like more content from me, I will be making another video going over what I recommend you bring if you're moving to Japan, if you've been accepted and you're moving to Japan. Things like how much money you should bring, or what to roughly expect. Should you get in contact with your contacting organization? What is a contacting organization? And also how to get like a phone line, like your mobile phone, which company you should use for your cellular data and phone number and things like that. All of that I'll be talking about in my next video related to JET, and my also recommendations before you head out. Like, for example, you probably should study Japanese. I would be going over a couple of resources like that. So if you're interested, please subscribe below and look forward to that next video. Any other additional questions, please comment them down below. And if you would just like to know more about my JET experience, I actually made a very comprehensive video here going over it from start to finish, and my own personal reflections on the experience that I think could help give you some sense of what to expect. Obviously, it's just one of my experience out of everyone's many different experiences, but I think it's nice. You should check it out. Okay, see you guys in the next video. Bye!